Shout out to this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. In this Civ overview, we're going to be taking an in-depth look at the Bohemians. Now, Bohemians are officially a gunpowder and monk civilization, though in practice they work pretty well as an archer civ early on, leading into a ton of late game options to choose from. At one point, they were known as the unbeatable arena civilization, with many relevant bonuses helping them out on that map, and still have a nice set of early and late game advantages that make them a relatively easy civ to pick up quickly, especially on arena. By online win rate, they're a fringe top 10 these days on 1v1 closed maps, but hover around the bottom 10 on 1v1 open maps. It's a somewhat large discrepancy, but will start to make a lot of sense as we go deeper, so let's check them out. Starting off with their team bonus, their markets work 80% faster, or in other words, things are done in about half the usual time. This has two components. First, for research, it saves 1 minute and 40 seconds across all market tags. So picking up coinage and banking to tribute resources, for example, happens 53 seconds earlier. I'd consider that a relatively minor effect though, and more critically, this means getting caravan and trade carts built faster, leading to a quicker initial boost of gold income from trade. To look at the breakdown, each trade cart is made in 28 seconds instead of the usual 51. I previously found in a test using 3 markets to create trade carts that pushing them out faster gave Bohemians about a 2,500 gold advantage after 10 minutes as a rough guideline. And remember, this is the same for each of your allies as well, assuming you're keeping trade carts coming out consistently. Long term, it isn't as good as something like the Spanish bonus, which delivers extra gold forever, but it's definitely up there as a very strong trade bonus. Moving on to their civ bonuses, the first is that their Blacksmith and University cost 100 less wood. For most games, that only sounds like 100 or maybe 200 wood saved, which isn't amazing in total. But what I like about this bonus is how it makes some key transitions much easier to pull off. If you're going archers, for example, which is a great opening for Bohemians, think about how much wood you need to spend. You have the cost of the barracks, 1 or 2 archery ranges, farms, houses, as well as the archers themselves, all on top of potentially having your own wood line raided. At the same time, you really need fletching, which requires a blacksmith, and for Bohemians, that building is a third of the usual cost. If you carry through with crossbows in Castle Age, that strategy is also helped again by a half-price university, making an early ballistics, or even in this case early chemistry, that much easier as well. You can see there's a couple of ways this bonus synergizes with an early archer into crossbow strategy, at least on open maps. On closed maps as well, where siege can be critical to early pushes, this bonus helps again, since you actually need a blacksmith to build a siege workshop as a building requirement. An early university is also a common feature in mid-Castle Age as Bohemians, not just because of its discount, but in fact because of their next bonus, which is that chemistry and the hand cannoneer are available in Castle Age. Again, the arena vibes are strong here, with a fast Imperial into Gunpowder being one of the classic arena strategies associated with civilizations like Turks and Byzantines. In this case, you can pull off a similar move without having to pay for Imperial Age at all, putting them on paper far ahead of even Turks, who get chemistry for free, both in terms of how quickly you can get to hand cannons, as well as how much you have to spend to get there. In fairness, you don't have bombard cannons in Castle Age as Bohemians, so it doesn't have quite the same flavor, but hand cannoneers even on their own pack quite a punch, especially against castle units, or anyone massing infantry. Just be a little careful about running into skirmishers. An alternate way to take advantage of this bonus is to use it to add extra power to your crossbows, as remember chemistry adds +1 attack. That means they can take out other crossbows in 1 less shot after all upgrades, and take out knights in 30 rather than 40 hits. Both of those cases are significant, but where it really stands out is against mangonels and skirmishers, where it effectively doubles their damage. Remember though, since every civilization has access to chemistry, it's best thought of as a short-term power spike in late Castle Age. The next bonus is that spearmen deal 25% extra bonus damage. This is effectively around 20% more attack against most cavalry units, given almost all of their damage there is from a bonus. This makes for an especially good combination with siege, hand cannoneers, or monks, as all of those are otherwise vulnerable to cavalry without support. Of course, we have to quickly address the obscure question here, what about against Sicilian cavalry with their resistance to bonus damage? The answer is, in that interaction, you get around 2/3 of the standard bonus damage, as it's a blend of the two, with Sicilians still having a significant reduction. Their next bonus is their Castle Age Monastery techs Fervor and Sanctity affect villagers, in addition to monks. This one's a little awkward because you have to go out of your way to remember those monk techs, which are available in Castle Age, but they are worth remembering if you can though, for a couple of benefits. Economically, you're looking at around a straight up 1 to 2% boost, especially if villagers have a long ways to walk, like in this example for farms and wood. In any case where you have poorly placed farms or inefficient lumber camps, you're probably getting closer to the high end of that range just from the extra speed. On the other hand, gold and stone at well-placed camps is obviously less affected by movement rate. A second impact is it makes your villagers more difficult to raid, both from the additional HP, but also the movement speed, letting them escape to town centers. Third, and potentially just as big of a deal, is how much easier this makes aggressive castle drops. Not only are your villagers harder to kill, but they also move faster across the map. Finally, yes, they have another bonus, which is their mining camp techs are free. This synergizes with basically any strategy, whether it's archers, knights, monks in siege, or even an early castle drop. Not only are the total savings significant on their own, but squeezing in those techs at the start of each age can be difficult under usual circumstances, whereas this takes that thought completely out of your mind. So that's the Bohemians' bonuses, and while it seems that on open maps they have the greatest benefit to archers, on closed maps they really have some nice advantages for anything from spears, siege, early gunpowder, and really any strategy should benefit from more gold income from mining and trade, a few cheaper buildings, and more difficult to raid villagers. Now let's move on and take a look at their unique unit, the Hussite Wagon. Now normally I like to compare similar unique units to each other, but this one's a little tricky. Superficially, it's a wagon, but unlike the war wagon, it doesn't take anti-cavalry and anti-archer bonus damage. In some ways, it's more like the organ gun, though with a unique defensive ability. It's reasonably expensive at 110 wood and 70 gold, but has solid all-around stats with high HP, attack, and pierce armor. The trade-off is a notable lack of melee armor and its relatively short range, which is only enhanced by siege engineers. The reason I bring up the organ gun comparison is, like that unit, it has a main projectile doing its advertised attack, with then some extra pellets doing 2 damage each with relatively low accuracy. Those extra shots, as well as some hidden bonus damage, make them reasonably good against rams, and they also have a bit of bonus damage against buildings, though I wouldn't consider that one of their specialties. Unfortunately, as a siege unit, they take a large amount of bonus damage from the mangonel line and bombard cannon, while also being outranged. So those are units that Hussite Wagons should avoid fighting head-on if at all possible, as well as anti-siege specialist units of course. To give them some context, they're about as fast as elephants, though that can be improved with unique tech. Bohemians generally have pretty slow core units though, so their speed doesn't really hold them back, aside from preventing hit and run tactics. Their attack animation also bugs out a bit if you move them while their extra projectiles haven't all fired yet. So in general, they do best when they're just left to fire on their own and not micromanaged too much. A final note about them is their very unique special ability, where any shots going over the unit and hitting a friendly one in behind only deal half damage. The Hussite Wagon for its part takes a trivial 1 damage every time this happens, and this is especially handy for protecting monks and gunpowder against long-range units, which is a little historical nod to Hussites using wagons to create makeshift forts on the battlefield. Practically speaking, the things to keep in mind is they're weak against the onager line or bombards, and melee units like paladins or champions can also win with equal resources. They're really at their best against either trash units or archers, but are usually a nice addition to early castle drops given their decent stats. Moving on, their second unique unit is the Houfnice, which is a unique upgrade for the bombard cannon. It is quite expensive, but it's also an upgrade for another very expensive unit, so in a way that's to be expected. The upgrade adds more to their HP and pierce armor, helping your unit survive a bit longer, but more importantly, it adds to their attack and blast radius. One critical difference that makes is being able to take out onagers in one shot consistently from full health, whereas that's not necessarily true of the regular bombard cannon. The extra blast radius is also incredibly helpful against bunched up groups of units, and the greater attack as well as a bit more bonus damage means they're better against buildings as well. These are specifically key situations where you want bombard support, and even though the unit has been nerfed recently, you are definitely being compensated for its cost if you're going heavily into bombards. As for their unique techs, the first is Wagenburg Tactics, which gives a straightforward plus 15% speed boost to your gunpowder units. This applies to hand cannons, bombard cannons, Hussite wagons, cannon galleons, and even the bombard tower is arguably affected, as 15% more than 0 is still 0, so that checks out. This specifically addresses what I mentioned before about Bohemians typically having a lot of slow units that they rely on, while also being a relatively cheap tech and can begin helping units as early as Castle Age. Their other unique tech is Hussite reforms, which changes the gold cost of monks and monastery techs to only costing food. This gives Bohemians their so-called trash monks, which lets them be a big part of your late game composition in situations you normally wouldn't be able to afford them. In addition to being quite expensive, the timing of this tech is also tricky, as order matters, and it doesn't refund previous gold that you've already spent. To show each extreme, getting all monk upgrades without this tech versus holding off on any techs beforehand, it's a massive difference in the ratio of gold to food you spend. While neither case may not be entirely realistic, this is just to highlight how much the order of getting those techs matters, though arguably the largest difference long-term is in the 100 gold turned to food cost of individual monks. If gold is a concern and you want to add monks to your army, then prioritizing this tech can definitely make sense, though keep in mind it's expensive enough I wouldn't consider it an automatic tech that you grab every single game. So that's all of their unique units and techs, which you can clearly see have quite a bit of focus on Gunpowder, with something encouraging monks thrown in as well. We've talked quite a bit about their options and different compositions already, but now let's do that in a more methodical way and walk through their tech tree, starting with the archers. To start with, they have a solid archer opening with a bit more gold and the discounted blacksmith. Hand cannoneers are also a strong option in age early, and really the only major weakness here is the lack of thumb ring. They're a bit like the American civilizations as well, in that they're lacking cavalry archer, which is something unusual and adds to their slow movement theme. You really can't go wrong here with any of their available options, and it's an A- for archers. Next up, for infantry, things look pretty solid, with fully upgraded champions and halberdiers. That said, the only relevant bonus here is extra damage on their halberdiers, and there's way too many good infantry civs for me to consider putting them in the A range. In this case, I'm going to give them an above average B+. Moving on to their cavalry, this is definitely not meant to be a focus for Bohemians. Theoretically, you could make knights in a situation calling for it, but without bloodlines, paladin, hussar, and the final armor upgrade, it's not something that plays to your strength. The free gold mining techs do help with early knights, and light cavalry can be useful to mix in against siege units or to add some mobility, but I'd say it's a C for the stable, and something you should be selective about considering. Next up is their siege, and this is more like it. While they are missing siege ram and siege onager, that's more than offset with the reduced blacksmith costs for early siege, and then eventually the Houfnice upgrade and plus 15% speed on your cannons. Technically, their unique unit is also siege, and really the only thing here holding you back is that there's very little automatically given to you, so keep in mind their potential is quite expensive to reach. I'd say their siege is still an A- for that high ceiling, though it's very dependent on having a strong enough economy. Checking in now on their navy, initially things start off pretty slow. There aren't any direct naval bonuses, though you do save 100 wood on a blacksmith for early fletching, plus you get the early mining upgrades. Compared to many other civilizations though, I'd say it's still an underwhelming C+ in the early game. That weakness also carries through to the late game, where they end up missing quite a few important upgrades. Considering they do have bracer for galleons and potentially 15% faster cannon galleons, it's another serviceable C+ in my opinion, for an overall C+ on the water. Taking a quick look now at monks, this is arguably one of the main focuses of the civilization, though they would have ranked higher when their monasteries were discounted in the past. They still have all the techs available though, and if for no other reason than the novelty of monks not costing gold, I'm giving Bohemians an A- for their monastery. Next up for defenses, between free stone mining, villagers with extra HP, early hand cannons to counter infantry, more bonus damage from spearmen, and basically all university techs available, this is a very defensively oriented civ. For me, they deserve an A in this category. Finishing up with trash units, that is the units that don't cost gold, the Hussar is the weakest of their choices by far. We also have to remember to include monks as a potential trash unit, though not necessarily one that's good against any of the others. On top of that, their halberdiers are also especially good against cavalry, plus their monastery techs affecting villagers can also be a subtle help in trash fights when it comes to raiding. I'd say it's at least a B for trash wars, really held back by their very weak cavalry. So that's the Bohemians. I have to admit, initially with the Dawn of the Dukes DLC, I gravitated a lot more toward the Poles. But this civ has grown on me as I embrace their archery range on open maps and their more unorthodox compositions, featuring lots of monks and bombard cannons in the late game. They end up with a very unique feel, and a lot of powerful late game tools to mix and match in whichever way the situation calls for. But speaking of powerful tools and options, that sounds a lot like this video's sponsor, Squarespace. If you're an entrepreneur, blogger, or someone looking to build an online presence but have no idea how to make a website from scratch, then Squarespace has you covered with great tools to help you out and simplify the website building process. Within minutes, I was able to create a professional-looking website for my future animal pedicure service, Spirit of the Paw, using one of their templates and then customizing it from there. Squarespace also have great third-party extensions to handle things like bookkeeping, taxes, shipping, and scheduling to accommodate your specific needs. You just pick a template and domain name, and you're good to go. The best part is if you use my code, you get 2 free weeks to try it out, and if you like it, you get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. So hopefully this video gave you a few ideas to try next time you're playing Bohemians, and was a helpful overview of some of the earlier deep dives. Thanks for watching, I'll see you next time.